On July 6, 2020, a woman named Lai Wei was reported missing by her daughter in Hangzhou, China. Police began searching. They checked surveillance cameras, they knocked on doors, they reviewed phone records. Nothing. For 18 days and 18 nights, investigators searched without stopping. Then someone suggested they check the sewage tank beneath the apartment building. They found her there, not whole, in pieces, flushed through the pipes by the man who had been helping police search for her. Her husband, who had been sleeping in the same apartment every night since she disappeared. He thought the water would erase everything. He was wrong. This is the story of Guoli and how a sewage tank became the witness that sent him to his death. Guoli and Lai Wei had known each other since 1988. They were young when they met, and their families approved of everything except one thing: each other. Lai Wei's parents refused to allow the marriage. The couple had no choice but to separate. They each moved on, each found someone else, each built a different life. For 20 years, they didn't speak. Then, in 2008, they crossed paths again. Both were now in failing marriages. Both were middle-aged. Both remembered what they thought they had lost. Within a year, each had left their spouse. Within 2 years, they were living together. They had a daughter together, a little girl. To anyone watching, it looked like a love story. Two people who had been kept apart by circumstance finally finding their way back to each other after 2 decades apart. But inside the walls of their small government apartment in East Hangzhou, something had gone very wrong. Sue told the court later that the problems were mundane: money, property disputes, arguments about their daughter's education. But by July 2020, whatever Sue felt toward Lai Wei had curdled into something he could not control. He had already bought the tools he would need: a box cutter, a cutting machine. He had already made his decision. The night of July 4th, 2020. Lai Wei made herself a glass of warm milk before bed, as she always did. What she didn't know was that her husband had already dissolved sleeping pills into the milk while she wasn't looking. She drank it. She went to bed. She fell into a deep, helpless sleep. Sometime in the early hours of July 5th, while Lai Wei lay unconscious in their bedroom, Guoli acted. He sealed her mouth with tape. He pressed a pillow over her face until she stopped breathing. He had planned every step in advance. After Lai Wei was dead, Sue moved her body to the bathroom. Using the tools he had purchased weeks earlier, the box cutter, the cutting machine, he spent hours dismembering her body. Then, piece by piece, he disposed of what remained. Some parts were wrapped and discarded in locations around the city. Other remains he flushed through the toilet, down through the pipes, into the sewage system beneath the building, into the communal septic tank shared by everyone in the complex. He believed the water would take care of the rest. Then he cleaned the bathroom, changed his clothes, and waited. On July 6th, Lai Wei's adult daughter from her first marriage came looking for her mother. Lai Wei wasn't answering her phone. She wasn't at home. She hadn't told anyone she was leaving. Guoli expressed concern. He helped his stepdaughter file a missing persons report. He spoke to neighbors about what might have happened. He cooperated with police who came to ask questions. For 18 days, he maintained this performance. He attended meetings with investigators. He answered questions. He expressed worry about his wife, all while knowing exactly where she was. Meanwhile, the investigation was struggling. Surveillance footage showed nothing useful. Phone records showed nothing suspicious. There was no body, no clear crime scene. The apartment had been thoroughly cleaned. For 18 days, police had almost nothing. On July 22nd, 18 days after Lai Wei disappeared, investigators made a decision. They would search the sewage tank beneath the apartment building. It was not a pleasant task. Workers pumped out the tank. Forensic teams examined what was inside. They found human remains. The fragments were small. Decomposition had been significant. Standard DNA testing would not be sufficient to make a definitive identification. So investigators turned to something more powerful: mitochondrial DNA analysis. Mitochondrial DNA is passed unchanged through the maternal line. It can be extracted from small fragments of tissue, even heavily degraded ones. Investigators contacted Lai Wei's biological relatives. Maternal family members provided samples. The mitochondrial DNA from the remains found in the sewage tank matched. The remains were Lai Wei. On July 23, 2020, 19 days after her murder, Guoli was arrested. He confessed the same day. What investigators assembled was a case built not on one piece of evidence, but on an interlocking structure that left no room for doubt. The sleeping pills. Investigators found the packaging. They confirmed the specific medication and traced the purchase. The tools. The box cutter and cutting machine had been purchased weeks before the murder. Premeditation, documented in transaction records. The DNA. The mitochondrial DNA analysis connected the remains in the sewage tank directly to Lai Wei's maternal bloodline. The confession. Guoli confessed in detail to the killing, the method, the dismemberment, the disposal. He later attempted to retract everything. He claimed his confessions had been coerced. He claimed he hadn't done it. But the court found his confessions consistent across multiple separate interviews conducted by different officers, prosecutors, and judges, in conditions where his legal rights had been explicitly explained to him. The evidence and the confessions, taken together, were irrefutable. The most damning detail. During the 18 days he cooperated with police, Guoli sat in meetings with investigators and expressed concern about where his wife might be. He knew. He had put her there. Guoli went to trial in May 2021 at the Hangzhou Intermediate People's Court. The courtroom was packed. Journalists had traveled from across China. Neighbors, strangers, ordinary people stood outside in the rain because they couldn't get a seat inside. Lai Wei's family sat as plaintiffs in a civil suit attached to the criminal case. In court, Zhu initially admitted the facts of the killing. He said, on the record, that whatever the court decided, he would not appeal. The court found him guilty of intentional homicide. The killing was premeditated. The method was particularly cruel. The means of disposal showed exceptional deliberateness. On July 26, 2021, Guoli was sentenced to death. He immediately changed his position. When the verdict was read aloud, he leapt to his feet and shouted, "This isn't true! This is wrong!" He filed an appeal. In April 2022, the Zhejiang High People's Court reviewed the case and upheld the death sentence. The case was then submitted to the Supreme People's Court of China for final review and approval, a mandatory step in all capital cases under Chinese law. The Supreme People's Court approved the sentence. On March 21, 2023, Guoli was executed by lethal injection at Hangzhou Intermediate People's Court. Justice in full. There's something I keep coming back to with this case. Guoli had planned this for weeks. He bought the tools in advance. He chose a method that would leave no visible body. He used the building's own plumbing to dispose of the evidence. He lived in the apartment for 18 days playing the grieving, confused husband. And the thing that caught him was a sewage tank, not a phone, not a camera, not a database. A concrete tank beneath a building, filled with water he thought would carry everything away. There is something almost poetic about it. He chose water as his accomplice. The water kept his secret for 18 days, and then it gave him up completely. Forensic science had advanced to the point where fragments too small to yield standard DNA could still be identified through mitochondrial analysis. He didn't know that, or maybe he assumed it wouldn't matter, that no one would think to look there. They looked. Lai Wei's name was never meant to be known beyond the walls of that apartment. The sewage tank made sure it was. Guoli was executed on March 21, 2023. Lai Wei was 54 years old when she died. She was a woman who had waited 20 years to reunite with the man she had once loved. A mother, a grandmother. She deserved to grow old. Her family sat in that courtroom and watched justice arrive slowly. Over 3 years, through a trial, through an appeal, through a Supreme Court review. But it arrived. If you found this case as haunting as I did, drop a comment below. Which piece of evidence surprised you most? And if you know a case where a killer was undone by the most unexpected witness, I want to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next verdict. Justice was served.